In March 2026, American crews in South Korea began quietly pulling apart one of the most advanced missile shields ever fielded. They weren't upgrading it. They weren't repairing it. They were shipping it out. The reason sat thousands of miles away, in the Middle East, where weeks of intense fighting had drained interceptor stockpiles down to almost nothing. A system built to guard soldiers on the ground had become the thing being hauled across the planet to plug a gap somewhere else. And it raises a question people argue about constantly. When the missiles actually start flying, which shield matters more, the Patriot or the THAAD? Most people answer with total confidence, and most of them are wrong. Here's the mistake almost everyone makes. They picture Patriot and THAAD as two fighters in a ring, one destined to knock the other out cold. Pick a whiner, crown a champion, move on. But that whole framing collapses the second you look at where each weapon actually does its job. One of them works down low, close to the earth, where aircraft and cruise missiles skim just above the horizon. The other reaches up toward the edge of space, destroying targets before they ever begin their final plunge. They aren't fighting for the same role. They cover different floors of the same building. And to understand why that separation exists, you have to go back more than 40 years. Picture the sky above a defended city as a stack of layers. At the very top, out near the edge of the atmosphere, an incoming warhead is still coasting through thin air. That's THAAD's hunting ground. Far below, in the final stretch before impact, the target is diving toward the ground, with almost no time left on the clock. That's where Patriot lives. Fire THAAD first, high and early. If it misses, Patriot takes the second shot down low. Two nets, stacked one beneath the other, so a single gap in one layer doesn't hand the enemy a direct hit. That's the entire logic behind the design. Not rivalry, redundancy. If the way modern warfare quietly reshapes itself behind the headlines pulls you in, subscribe. And you'll start noticing these shifts long before they reach the news. The two systems began life with completely different missions. Back in October 1984, the Patriot entered service with the US Army as something almost nobody remembers today, an aircraft killer built for the Cold War. Its original job involved shooting down Soviet jets streaking over Europe. Then the nature of war shifted underneath it. Ballistic missiles became the new nightmare, and engineers rebuilt the Patriot from the inside out to catch them in the final seconds of flight. The modern version, called the PA-3 MSE, doesn't rely on an explosion and a cloud of shrapnel. It slams straight into its target, metal driving into metal at closing speeds that reduce a warhead to fragments. A weapon designed for one conflict, reinvented for the next. THAAD showed up much later, and it was built for a threat the early Patriot could never reach. In May 2008, it entered service with one clear purpose: stopping ballistic missiles across short, medium, and intermediate ranges before they closed in on the ground. No warhead of its own, no explosion, just a small, fast projectile that hunts down its target and destroys it through raw impact. What truly set it apart was reach. THAAD can strike a missile at an altitude of 150 kilometers, out where the atmosphere thins into space. Set that beside Patriot's ceiling of 20 to 35 kilometers, and the difference stops being subtle. These were never competitors. They were engineered for two separate slices of the very same sky. None of it works without eyes. THAAD depends on a radar called the AN/TPY-2. One of the most powerful mobile radars ever built, able to detect a missile launch from hundreds of kilometers out and stir an interceptor straight onto it. A single one of these radar units carries a price tag near $1 billion. Just the radar, not the launchers, not the interceptors, not the crews who operate it around the clock. That figure reveals something uncomfortable about modern air defense. The sensors that let you see a threat can cost as much as a small fleet of combat aircraft. And spotting the threat, as it happens, is the cheap and easy part. Actually stopping it is where the heavy bill arrives. For decades, THAAD had never fired a shot in combat, sitting ready but untested. That changed. On December 27, 2024, a THAAD battery stationed in Israel, operated by American crews, tracked an incoming medium-range missile and knocked it clean out of the sky. It was the system's first confirmed combat interception. The target was a Houthi projectile. The group named Palestine II, described by its makers as a maneuvering hypersonic missile. The engagement stayed out of public view for months. Then, in August 2025, a Chinese defense analyst named Guo Yanying went public with the details, turning a rumored strike into documented history. In a single stroke, the world gained something genuinely rare: solid combat data on a system that had spent 16 years waiting for its first test. If this breakdown is landing for you, take a second to hit like. It honestly helps push it toward more people who want the real picture. That word, hypersonic, deserves a much closer look, because it gets tossed around far too loosely. The Houthis labeled Palestine II a maneuvering hypersonic weapon. Plenty of Western analysts pushed back, and their point was simple. Almost any medium-range ballistic missile naturally reaches hypersonic speed, past 5 times the speed of sound, during its dive back toward the Earth. Raw velocity alone doesn't make a missile exotic. What matters is whether it can twist, dodge, and change course mid-flight to fool a defender. True maneuverability. On that specific question, the evidence stayed thin. So the intercept confirmed THAAD could destroy a fast, descending target. Whether it proved anything about defeating an agile threat, that argument is far from settled. Now for the part that keeps defense planners up at night: cost. Under the latest 2026 production scale, a single THAAD interceptor runs about $15.5 million. One shot. A domestically built Patriot PAC-3 MSE interceptor costs far less, somewhere between $3.9 and $4.2 million. Still expensive, but a fraction of the higher tier round. Now run the math on an incoming barrage. When an enemy fires cheap missiles by the dozen, every single one you shoot down drains millions from the treasury. A week of heavy bombardment can burn through cash faster than the fighting burns through anything else. Air defense, it turns out, can quietly lose the economic war even while winning the one in the sky. Scale that up to an entire system, and the numbers grow heavier still. A newly built Patriot battery costs the U.S. military roughly $1.1 billion. Around $400 million of that covers the hardware, the launchers, the radar, the command station. The remaining $690 million buys a full load of missiles to arm it. More than half the cost of a complete battery is nothing but ammunition. And that's the price the American military pays at home. For a foreign buyer, the figure climbs far higher, because the deal comes bundled with training, spare parts, and years of logistics support that inflate the total dramatically. Switzerland learned that lesson the hard way. On May 13th, 2026, the Swiss government suspended its payments to the United States and reopened the entire question of whether to buy Patriot systems at all. The reason came straight from Arma Suisse, the country's federal armaments office. A spokesperson confirmed the purchase price could jump by more than 50%, and deliveries might slip by as much as 7 years. 7 years is a brutal wait for a shield you've already started paying for. Export packages for countries like Switzerland routinely run between $2.2 and nearly $4 billion, well above the domestic sticker. So a nation that simply wanted protection found itself staring at a bill that kept climbing and a delivery date that kept drifting further out of reach. Those delays weren't some bureaucratic accident. They grew out of a shortage the whole system suddenly faced. Years of relentless fighting in the Middle East had chewed through interceptor stockpiles at a pace nobody had planned for. Patriots and THAADs were leaving the launchers, faster than any factory could rebuild them. That's exactly what forced the Pentagon to strip defenses out of East Asia in the first place. To claw its way back, on June 26, 2026, the U.S. Missile Defense Agency handed Lockheed Martin a contract worth up to $35 billion across 7 years. The mission was blunt. Push THAAD interceptor production from 96 missiles a year all the way to 400. More than a 4-fold leap, just to climb out of the hole. All of this points to one shift reshaping air defense right now. If firing a $15 million round at a $50,000 drone is a losing trade, the answer isn't a better expensive missile. It's a cheaper one. Militaries around the world have started chasing low-cost interceptors that can be built fast and fired without emptying the budget on a single engagement. The logic is cold arithmetic. You cannot win a war of attrition. If every shot you take costs 100 times more than the shot coming at you, and the country pushing hardest on that idea wasn't a superpower with endless factories. It was a nation fighting for its survival, with no choice but to solve the math problem the difficult way. That country was Ukraine. On July 8, 2026, during talks at the NATO summit in Ankara, the U.S., President shook hands with Ukraine's leader and approved something without precedent: a license allowing Ukraine to manufacture Patriot interceptor missiles on its own soil. The point was to shorten the supply chain and stop leaning on overseas plants that couldn't keep pace. Then, Ukraine reached even further. 10 nations gathered in Paris to back a homegrown interceptor named Freya, engineered to bring down Russian ballistic missiles for roughly $700,000 a shot. Set that against a Patriot round costing several times as much, and the whole equation of who can afford to keep fighting begins to tilt. Cheap defense, produced at home, aimed at surviving a long war. So return to the question that opened all this. Which one wins, Patriot or THAAD? The honest answer is that the question itself is broken. Neither beats the other because neither was ever built to fight the same battle. THAAD reaches into the upper atmosphere and the edge of space, catching threats early, high, and far from their target. Patriot guards the final approach, the last desperate seconds before a warhead strikes home. Remove either layer and the shield tears open. The contest was never Patriot versus THAAD at all. It was cost against capability, factories against firepower, and time against the very next missile already climbing off its launcher. And that's the uneasy truth buried under all the hardware. The best interceptor on Earth is worthless the moment you run out of them mid-fight. That's why American crews had to strip THAAD from a Korean base. Why Switzerland balked at a bill that ballooned overnight. Why Ukraine now insists on building its own. Modern air defense isn't decided by the fastest missile or the highest ceiling in the sky. It's decided by whoever can keep firing, after the budget runs dry and the launchers sit empty. If this pulled back the curtain on something you'd never quite seen this clearly, like and subscribe. There's far more hidden in plain sight, waiting for anyone willing to look.